Commander Zexathara sat in the corner of the space station cantina, his 4 arms wrapped around a tall glass of blue liquid. The alien's body was covered in thick plates that looked like armor, but scars ran across them like lightning bolts. His big round eyes stared at nothing as he drank. Young soldiers from different planets often came to him asking about the war, but tonight he just wanted to be alone. 3 young officers walked up to his table. One was from the Waterworld Aquarius, with smooth blue skin and gills on his neck. Another was a tall, thin creature from Centauri Prime, with long arms and silver eyes. The third was a small, furry being from the mining colonies, barely reaching the other's waists. "Commander Zexathara," said the Aquarian in his bubbling voice, "we heard you fought in the Great Human War. Can you tell us what it was like?" The old warrior looked up at them slowly. His compound eyes caught the light from the cantina's glowing ceiling. "Sit down," he said in a voice that sounded like gravel falling down a metal chute. "You want to know about humans? Fine. But don't expect stories of glory and honor. There was nothing glorious about that war." The 3 young soldiers quickly took seats around the scarred table. Zexathara took another long drink before speaking again. "I served 27 years in the Coalition forces," he began. "I fought the Krillian Empire when they tried to take over the Outer Rim. I was there during the Nexus Rebellion when 3 star systems tried to break away. I even helped stop the machine uprising on Proxima 7 when the robots tried to kill all organic life. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared any of us for what humans could do." He paused and looked at each young face around the table. "You know how we found them? Pure accident. One of our long-range scout ships picked up radio signals from a small yellow star on the edge of known space. Primitive signals, just basic mathematics and some music. Command thought it might be worth investigating." The Centaurian leaned forward. "We learned about this in Academy. Earth was a Class 3 civilization, correct?" "That's right," Zexathara nodded. "Class 3. They had barely figured out how to split the atom. Their fastest ships used chemical, rockets that took months to travel between planets in their own system. Their weapons were metal projectiles fired by explosive powder. Some of their soldiers still fought with sharp pieces of steel attached to sticks." The small furry alien made a chittering sound that was probably laughter. "And they thought they could fight the Coalition?" Zexathara's eyes went dark. "They didn't think they could fight us, young one. They knew they would lose. That's what made them so dangerous." He took another drink and continued. "The first contact teams reported that humans were curious about us. They asked questions about our technology, our worlds, our species. They seemed friendly enough. Some of their leaders even talked about joining the Coalition peacefully. But there was something else. Something our diplomats missed." The old soldier's voice got quieter, making the others lean in to hear him. Humans had been fighting wars on their own planet for thousands of years. Not just small conflicts, but massive wars that killed millions of their own kind. They had developed weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. They had tactics and strategies that no other species had ever needed to think about. "What kind of tactics?" asked the Aquarian. "Terrible ones," Zexathara replied. "They had a concept called total war. Most species fight to protect their homes and families. They surrender when the cost becomes too high. But humans developed the idea that sometimes you have to destroy everything to prevent your enemy from having it. They called it scorched earth policy." He gestured with 2 of his arms while keeping the other 2 wrapped around his drink. During their own wars, human armies would burn their own crops, blow up their own bridges, poison their own water supplies, and destroy their own cities rather than let enemies use them. They would rather starve than let invaders eat their food. The 3 young officers exchanged worried glances. This didn't sound like the primitive species they had learned about in their classes. The territorial dispute started over 7 worlds. "In the Kepler system," Zexathara continued, Rich worlds with rare minerals and perfect climates for farming. The Coalition had legal claim to them under the expansion accords, but humans had already settled there. Standard procedure was to offer them relocation to other worlds or membership in the Coalition with limited self-governance. That sounds fair, said the Centaurian. It was fair, Zexthara agreed. Most species would have accepted, but humans sent back a message that confused everyone. Their representative, a woman named President Linda Hayes, said they would consider the offer. But then she asked a question that should have warned us about what was coming. The old warrior paused for dramatic effect. She asked, "What happens if we refuse?" "Standard procedure," the furry alien said. "Economic sanctions, then limited. Military action to enforce Coalition law." "That's what we told them," Zexthara nodded. "President Hayes thanked us for our honesty. Then she said something that our translators had trouble with. She said, 'In that case, we'll show you what we learned from studying our own history. Some things are worth more than life itself.'" Zexthara finished his drink and signaled the server for another. Command didn't understand the message. Our xenopsychologist said it was probably just primitive posturing. Humans were trying to seem tough to get a better deal. Admiral Korthak decided to show them the futility of resistance with a demonstration of force. The server brought another blue drink. Zexthara wrapped his arms around it like he was hugging an old friend. We assembled a fleet of 200 ships, cruisers, destroyers, support vessels, troop transports, enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. The plan was simple: jump into the Kepler system, demand immediate surrender, and accept their inevitable submission. If they refused, we would disable their primitive orbital defenses and land troops on their capitals. The whole operation was scheduled to take 72 hours. The three young soldiers waited for him to continue, but Zexthara seemed lost in memory. His compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights as he stared at something only he could see. "Commander?" the Aquarian prompted gently. Zexthara blinked and focused on them again. 72 hours, he repeated. "That's what we called it afterward. The 72-hour war." Command was so confident that they sent news crews along to document humanity's peaceful integration into the Coalition. Some officers brought their families to watch from safe distances. His voice became even quieter. The fleet jumped into the system on a Tuesday morning, Coalition Standard Time. Admiral Korthak immediately broadcast a demand for surrender to the human colonies. We expected to receive acceptance within a few hours, maybe by evening. "What happened instead?" the small furry alien asked. Zexthara looked directly at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Instead, young one, we learned why humans are the most terrifying species in the galaxy. We learned that some beings would rather burn in hell than bow to heaven." The cantina grew quieter as Commander Zexthara began speaking again. Other aliens at nearby tables stopped their conversations to listen. The old warrior's voice carried across the room like a cold wind. "The first world we approached was called New Dakota by the humans," he said, his four arms moving as he spoke. "It was their largest colony in the Kepler system. 2 million civilians lived there, mostly farmers and miners. Our sensors showed they had about 5,000 soldiers defending the entire planet." The Aquarian officer made bubbling sounds of disbelief. 5,000 against our fleet? "That's what we thought too," Zexthara replied. Admiral Korthak was almost insulted. He had brought enough ships to fight a real military power, not some farmers with primitive weapons. The human orbital defenses consisted of 3 small stations and maybe 20 patrol ships. Our smallest destroyer could have handled all of them. He took a drink and continued. "But something felt wrong from the moment we entered the system. Our communication officers kept picking up strange signals from the planet's surface. Not military channels, but civilian broadcasts. Humans were talking to each other on every frequency we could monitor." The small furry alien tilted his head. "What were they saying?" "That's the thing. Zexathera said slowly. They weren't panicking. Most species would be in chaos when a massive alien fleet appeared in their sky. Children would be crying. Adults would be running to shelters. Leaders would be desperately trying to contact us to negotiate. But the humans were calm. Too calm. The old soldier's eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the cantina walls. Our translators worked around the clock to understand their conversations. Humans were talking about something called evacuation procedures. Parents were telling their children about special games they had practiced. Workers were receiving instructions about shutting down power plants and factories. It was all very organized, very planned. He paused and looked at the young officers. That should have been our first warning. Humans had been preparing for this day for years, maybe decades. They knew eventually someone would come to take their worlds away from them. The Centaurian leaned forward. What did Admiral Korthak do? He followed standard procedure, Zexathera answered. Opened a communication channel to their military command and demanded to speak with their leader. The response came from a human, female named Colonel Lisa Grant. She was the commanding officer of something called the 3rd Colonial Defense Force. Zexathera's voice took on a different tone as he remembered the conversation. Colonel Grant appeared on our screens wearing a simple green uniform. She looked young, maybe 30 years old in human terms. Brown hair, green eyes, very ordinary looking. Nothing about her seemed dangerous or threatening. What did she say? The furry alien asked. She was polite at first, Zexathera replied. She welcomed us to the Kepler system and said she hoped we could resolve our differences peacefully. Admiral Korthak explained that the Coalition had legal claim to all 7 worlds under the expansion accords. He offered the humans relocation to other planets or limited membership in the Coalition. The old warrior took another drink. Colonel? Grant listened carefully and asked several questions about the terms. How long would humans have to relocate? What kind of worlds would they be given? Would families be kept together? She seemed genuinely interested in finding a peaceful solution. That sounds reasonable, the Aquarian said. It was reasonable, Zexathera agreed. For about 10 minutes, we thought we might avoid violence entirely. Then Colonel Grant asked her, final question. She wanted to know what would happen if humans refused both offers. The cantina had grown completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving to listen to the story. Admiral Korthak told her the truth. Zexathera continued. Coalition forces would be required to use military action to enforce our legal claim. We would disable their defenses, land troops, and remove them from the planets by force if necessary. Standard procedure for dealing with illegal settlements. Zexathera's voice became very quiet. Colonel Grant was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she smiled. Not a happy smile, not a sad smile, but something else entirely. She said, "Thank you for being honest, Admiral. Now let me be honest with you. This is Colonel Lisa Grant of, the 3rd Colonial Defense Force. You are not welcome here. Turn back now, or we will show you why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy." The 3 young officers exchanged glances. The small, furry alien made a nervous chittering sound. Admiral Korthak actually laughed, Zexathera said. I was on the bridge and I heard him laugh. He told Colonel Grant that threats would not change anything. He gave her 1 hour to begin evacuation procedures or he would start disabling their orbital platforms. What did she say to that? The Centaurian asked. She said, Admiral, you misunderstand. That wasn't a threat. That was a warning. We've been preparing for this conversation for 15 years. Goodbye. Zexathera paused and stared into his drink. Then she cut the communication. The old warrior was quiet for several moments. The young officers waited, sensing that something terrible was coming in the story. What happened next changed everything we thought we knew about warfare, Zexathera finally said. 30 seconds after Colonel Grant ended the call, every human settlement on the planet's surface lit up like stars. Not explosions from our weapons, but from their own. His voice became hollow. They had hidden nuclear missiles under every major city, every factory, every spaceport, every piece of infrastructure that might be useful to an occupying force. Thousands of warheads launched simultaneously. Not at our ships, not at military targets, but at their own civilization. The Aquarian made a shocked gurgling sound. They attacked themselves? They destroyed everything, Zexathara said. In less than 15 minutes, 2 million humans had reduced their own world to radioactive ash. Every city was gone. Every farm was poisoned. Every mine was collapsed. Every building that could shelter troops was melted slag. He took a shaky drink. Our sensors showed that the planet's surface temperature had increased by 50 degrees. Radiation levels made landing impossible for organic life. The humans had turned their own world into a weapon against us. The small, furry alien was shaking. But why? Why would they do that to their own people? Zexathara looked at him with ancient, tired eyes. Because, young one, they would rather die free than live as slaves. But that wasn't the end. That was just the beginning of our education about human warfare. His compound eyes reflected the cantina lights like broken mirrors. Because 30 minutes after the surface burned, our sensors detected massive energy signatures deep underground, bunker complexes we hadn't known existed, and Colonel Grant's voice came over the communication channels one more time. The 3 officers leaned forward, afraid to hear what came next. She said, Phase 1 complete. All civilians evacuated to deep shelters. All infrastructure denied to enemy forces. Beginning Phase 2. Welcome to hell, Admiral. Commander Zexathara stared at his drink for a long time before continuing his story. The 3 young officers waited quietly, afraid to break the silence. Other aliens in the cantina had stopped pretending to mind their own business and were openly listening now. Phase 2 began 6 hours after the surface burned, the old warrior said finally. Admiral Korthak was furious. He had never seen anything like what the humans had done. Destroying your own world to spite an enemy was beyond anything in coalition military doctrine. The Centaurian officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What did the Admiral do? He ordered a full orbital bombardment of the underground facilities, Zexathara replied. If humans wanted to hide in holes, he would collapse those holes on top of them. Our heavy cruisers began firing plasma cannons at the energy signatures our sensors had detected. Zexathara's 4 arms moved as he described the attack. For 3 hours, we poured enough firepower into that planet to crack its crust. Mountains were leveled. Valleys were filled with molten rock. The very ground glowed white-hot from the bombardment. Did it work? The small, furry alien asked. We thought it had, Zexathara said. All energy readings went dark. No more signals came from the underground complexes. Admiral Korthak declared the planet secure and ordered landing troops to establish a base for future operations. The old soldier took another drink. I was part of the first landing force, 2,000 coalition Marines from 6 different species, equipped with the best armor and weapons our technology could provide. We landed in what had been the human capital city. His voice became distant as he remembered. The devastation was complete. Nothing remained but twisted metal and glass melted into strange shapes. Radiation levels were still dangerous, but our suits could handle it. We set up a perimeter and began searching for any signs of remaining human forces. But there weren't. Any, right? The Aquarian said hopefully. Zexathara looked at him with something that might have been pity. That's what we thought. For 2 days, we found nothing. No bodies, no weapons, no equipment. Just empty ruins and radioactive dust. Some of our officers started to think maybe the humans had actually evacuated their entire population before destroying the planet. He paused and looked around the cantina. Every alien in the place was listening now, drinks forgotten in their hands. On the 3rd day, Private Kelks from Tau Ceti was on patrol near the ruins of what had been a school. He stepped on what looked like a piece of debris. The ground collapsed under him. The 3 young officers leaned forward. Kelks fell 20 feet into a tunnel system we hadn't detected. Our sensors couldn't penetrate that deep after all the bombardment. When we pulled him out, he was babbling about voices in the dark. Human voices singing something in their own language. Zexthara's compound eyes reflected the cantina lights as he continued. We sent down a full squad with better equipment. The tunnels went everywhere, connecting the ruins of different buildings, different districts, even different cities. The humans had spent years building a second civilization underground. Were there many of them left? The Centaurian asked. We couldn't tell, Zexthara replied. Every time our troops entered the tunnels, they would hear sounds, footsteps echoing in the darkness, voices whispering in human language. Sometimes they would find fresh food scraps or recently used equipment, but never any actual humans. The old warrior's voice grew darker. Then the attacks began. Not big battles or direct confrontations, but something worse. Psychological warfare. He described how coalition patrols would find their equipment sabotaged overnight. Weapons would malfunction at crucial moments. Communication devices would broadcast human songs at random times. Supply caches would disappear without any sign of who had taken them. The worst part was the messages, Zexthara said. Every few days we would find writing on walls or rocks. Always the same thing, written in coalition standards so we could all read it. Lisa Grant remembers. New Dakota remembers. We are still here. The small, furry alien was shaking now. How many humans were left? That's what drove us crazy, Zexthara answered. We never knew. Our best estimates said maybe 50,000 had survived in the deep bunkers, but they moved through those tunnels like ghosts. A full company of coalition troops would sweep an area and find nothing. 6 hours later, human writing would appear, on buildings in the same area. He took a long drink before continuing. After 2 weeks of this, morale started to break down. Soldiers were jumping at shadows. Officers were requesting transfers off the planet. Some troops refused to go on patrol alone. The Centaurian officer looked confused. But you had overwhelming numbers and superior technology. That's what made it so terrifying, Zexthara explained. We had orbital support, heavy weapons, armor that could stop anything humans could throw at us, but none of that mattered when you couldn't find your enemy. He described how the psychological attacks escalated. Coalition troops would wake up to find human trinkets placed next to their sleeping areas. Personal items that couldn't possibly have been there the night before. Photos of human families, children's toys, wedding rings. The humans were sending us a message, Zexthara said. They wanted us to know that we weren't fighting soldiers anymore. We were fighting an entire civilization that had gone underground. Every human left alive, from elderly grandparents to young children, was part of their resistance. The old warrior's voice became barely a whisper. 3 weeks after we landed, Colonel Grant herself appeared on our communication channels again. Not from the underground tunnels, but from orbit. Somehow, some group of humans had captured one of our supply ships. All 3 young officers gasped. She looked exactly the same as she had a month before, Zexthara continued. Same green uniform, same brown hair, same calm expression. She said, "Hello again, Admiral. We hope you're enjoying your visit to New Dakota. The weather down there can be quite warm this time of year." He paused for effect. Then she said something that made Admiral Korthak's blood run cold. "We've been watching your supply routes, Admiral. Very predictable patterns. We thought you might like to know that 17 other coalition ships have gone missing in the past week. Their crews are safe, of course. We've relocated them to comfortable facilities where they can think about the wisdom of invading human space." The cantina was completely silent now. "That's when we realized the truth," Zexthara said. "The humans hadn't just destroyed their own world to spite us. They had turned it into a trap. While we were hunting ghosts in the ruins, other human forces were operating throughout the star system, picking off our ships one by one." He finished his drink and looked at the 3 young officers. We had walked into a web and the spiders were already wrapping us up. Commander Zexathara ordered another drink before continuing his story. The young officers noticed his hands were shaking more now. The memories were clearly getting harder to tell. After New Dakota, everything changed, he said slowly. Hi. Command realized we weren't fighting a normal species. Admiral Korthak called for reinforcements and new strategies. The Coalition sent their best military minds to study what had happened. The Aquarian officer bubbled nervously. What did they learn? That we had made a terrible mistake, Zexthara replied. We had assumed humans thought like other species. Most civilizations fight to protect what they have. They surrender when the cost becomes too high. But humans had developed something called the doctrine of total war. He gestured with two arms while keeping the other two wrapped around his drink. Their military historians had studied every major conflict in their species' history. They learned that sometimes the only way to win is to make victory so expensive that your enemy gives up. The old warrior's voice grew darker. Humans didn't fight to protect their worlds. They fought to make conquering those worlds meaningless. If they couldn't have their homes, they would make sure nobody else could either. But that's insane, the small furry alien said. That's what we thought too, Zexathara nodded. But it worked. After 6 months of fighting on New Dakota, we controlled a dead rock that couldn't support life for thousands of years. We had spent more resources conquering one worthless planet than we usually spent on entire star systems. He took a drink and continued. The second world we attacked was called New Austin. This time, Admiral Korthak decided to use different tactics. Instead of demanding surrender, he would simply destroy their military forces from orbit and then land troops on a clean planet. The Centaurian leaned forward. That sounds more efficient. It would have been, Zexathara said, if humans had let us. The moment our fleet entered the New Austin system, they activated something they called the Samson Protocol. His compound. Eyes seemed to focus on something far away. Every human installation in the system began overloading their power cores simultaneously. Orbital platforms, defense stations, even civilian ships docked at their spaceports. They turned their entire infrastructure into bombs. The three young officers stared at him in horror. The explosions created a debris field that stretched across half the star system, Zexathara continued. Chunks of metal and radioactive material moving at incredible speeds. Our fleet had to retreat or be torn apart by the wreckage. He described how the debris field had destroyed 30 Coalition ships before they could escape. The humans had sacrificed their entire orbital presence to deny the Coalition an easy victory. But the worst part came after the explosions, the old warrior said. Their planetary leader, a man called President Jack Morrison, sent us a message. As we watched their civilization destroy itself, Zexthara's voice took on a mocking human accent. He said, "Greetings from the people of New Austin. Population as of today, 0. We hope you enjoy your new real estate. The previous owners left it exactly the way they wanted you to find it." The small furry alien made a distressed, chittering sound. "They killed everyone?" "That's what we thought," Zexathara replied. President Morrison activated the planet's main fusion reactor and overloaded it. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. When the light faded, New Austin was a ball of radioactive slag that would be uninhabitable for 10,000 years. He paused to let that sink in. But our intelligence teams later discovered something that changed everything. The humans had evacuated the entire population weeks before we arrived. Every civilian, every child, every elderly person had been secretly moved to hidden colonies. The Aquarian made shocked gurgling sounds. They had planned it all? Down to the smallest detail, Zexathara confirmed. The humans had been preparing for this war for decades. They had built secret shipyards, hidden supply depots, and evacuation routes we never detected. What looked like desperate last stands were actually calculated strategies. The old soldier described how Coalition intelligence had found evidence of massive human preparations. Entire asteroids had been hollowed out and turned into mobile bases. Old mining ships had been converted into weapons platforms. Even human, merchant vessels carried hidden armaments. By the time we attacked their third world, we knew what to expect, Zexthara said. But knowing didn't make it easier to watch. The humans had perfected their doctrine of destruction. He told them about the battle for New Denver, where humans had hidden antimatter charges under every major city. When the Coalition fleet arrived, they found a planet that had already begun destroying itself. Their military commander was a woman, named General Amy Rodriguez, Zexthara said. She broadcast a message to our fleet while her world burned behind her. She said, "Welcome to human space. We've prepared a special reception for you. Enjoy watching your victory turn to ash." The old warrior's voice became hollow. General Rodriguez had turned the entire planet into a weapon. Not just the cities, but the very ground itself. They had planted explosives in mountain ranges, poisoned water supplies, and contaminated fertile soil with radioactive material. He described how the humans had even destroyed their own atmosphere. Chemical plants released toxic gases that would make the air unbreathable for centuries. The planet became a poisoned wasteland that would kill any organic life that tried to live there. But the psychological warfare was just beginning, Zexthara continued. While we were watching New Denver die, human forces appeared throughout Coalition space. Small ships, converted civilian vessels, even individual fighters began attacking our supply lines. His compound eyes reflected the cantina lights like broken glass. They called themselves the Long War Fleet, humans who had volunteered for suicide missions against Coalition targets. Captain Steve Parker commanded a converted merchant ship called the Defiant. For 2 years, his crew attacked our convoys and disappeared before we could respond. The 3 young officers exchanged terrified glances. Every attack came with the same message, Zexthara said. Parker would broadcast on all frequencies. "This is the human race. We are still here. We remember our worlds. We remember everything. This is not over." He took a shaky drink. That's when we realized the truth. We weren't fighting a war anymore. We were fighting an entire species that had decided death was better than defeat, and they were teaching us that victory against them would cost more than any prize was worth, the Foss. Cantina fell completely silent as the old warrior stared into his empty glass. The worst part was knowing that somewhere in the darkness between the stars, more humans were still out there, still fighting, still refusing to surrender. Commander Zexthara sat in silence for several minutes, staring at his empty glass. The cantina had become completely quiet. Even the servers had stopped moving to listen to his story. Finally, he looked up at the 3 young officers with eyes that had seen too much. "The war was supposed to last 72 hours, he said quietly. It lasted 3 years. By the end, the Coalition had technically won. We controlled human space, or what was left of it. But it was the most expensive victory in galactic history." The Aquarian officer made nervous bubbling sounds. "How expensive?" Of the original human population of 12 billion people across 47 worlds, fewer than 200,000 remained alive when the fighting stopped, Zexthara replied. They had systematically destroyed their own civilization rather than let us have it. He described the final battles in the outer colonies. World after world chosen death over surrender. Human defenders would evacuate civilians to hidden ships, then turn their planets into weapons against the Coalition fleet. The humans developed new tactics every month, the old warrior continued. On New Phoenix, they loaded cargo ships with antimatter and sent them on collision courses with our battleships. The volunteer pilots called themselves the Kamikaze Corps, named after some ancient human warrior tradition. Zexthara's voice became haunted. "I watched a young human woman named Lieutenant Beth Carter ram her modified racing ship into one of our cruisers. Her final message was broadcast on all frequencies. 'Tell my parents I won the race. Time to see what's on the other side.'" The explosion destroyed both ships and damaged 3 others. The small, furry alien was shaking. Why would anyone do that? Because, to humans, some things were worth more than life, Zexathera explained. They had concepts like honor, freedom, and dignity that they valued more than survival. They would rather die standing up than live on their knees. He told them about the siege of Earth itself, humanity's birth world and capital. The Coalition had saved it for last, hoping the humans might surrender to save their ancestral home. Admiral Helen Carter commanded the last human fleet, Zexathera said. She was the sister of that young pilot who had died at New Phoenix. When our forces reached the Sol system, Admiral Carter was waiting with maybe 50 ships against our fleet of 800. The Centaurian leaned forward. What did she do? Something that haunts me to this day, Zexathera replied. Instead of defending Earth, Admiral Carter led her entire fleet directly toward the sun, not to ram our ships, not to make a desperate attack, but to activate some kind of stellar manipulation device they had hidden in the solar corona. His compound eyes reflected the cantina lights as he remembered. Carter broadcast one final message to the Coalition fleet. She said, "This is Admiral Helen Carter of the Terran Defense Force. We deny you our world, our culture, and our submission. Remember this day, because it's the last time you'll see humans bow to anyone. Earth dies free." The 3 young officers stared in horror as Zexathera continued. "The device increased the sun's output by 300%, he said. Earth's surface was sterilized in minutes. Every city, every monument, every trace of human civilization burned away. The humans had murdered their own birth world rather than let us set foot on it." He took a shaky breath. But that wasn't the end. As Earth burned, Admiral Carter's voice came over the communications one more time. She said, "Phase 1 of the Long War is complete. Phase 2 begins now. See you in hell!" Zexathera described how the surviving humans scattered across the galaxy in small groups. No longer trying to hold territory, they became something worse than an enemy army. They became an idea that refused to die. For years, after the official end of the war, human ships would appear without warning, he said. They would strike at Coalition supply convoys, rescue stations, even civilian transports. Always the same message. The human race endures. We remember Earth. We remember everything. The old warrior's voice grew quieter. Captain Steve Parker's ship, the Defiant, became a legend among Coalition forces. His crew had been harassing our operations for 5 years after Earth died. Every attack came with his personal signature. "This is how humans say goodbye. Sweet dreams." He described how the psychological impact spread throughout Coalition space. Soldiers began requesting transfers away from former human territory. Some species threatened to withdraw from the Coalition entirely if the war continued. The final blow came when we realized the truth about human evacuation procedures, Zexathera said. Our intelligence teams discovered that most of the population we thought had died on those worlds had actually been secretly relocated to hidden colonies outside known space. The Aquarian made shocked, gurgling sounds. They were still alive? Millions of them, Zexathera confirmed, living on asteroid bases, hollow moons, and mobile space habitats we never detected. The humans had spent decades preparing not just to fight us, but to survive us. Every destroyed world was a deliberate sacrifice to buy time for their civilians to escape. He finished his final drink and stood up slowly. That's why the Treaty of Proxima exists today. That's why human space is marked as a quarantine zone that no Coalition ship is allowed to enter. Because somewhere out there, in the dark between the stars, humans are still alive, still angry, still fighting their long war. The cantina remained, completely silent as Zexathera prepared to leave. The coalition claimed victory, he said, looking at each young officer in turn. We controlled every world humans had ever lived on, but we learned something that changed galactic politics forever. There's a difference between defeating an enemy and conquering them. Some species would rather burn the galaxy than accept chains. He walked slowly toward the exit, his scarred exoskeleton creaking with each step. At the doorway, he turned back. One final time. 25 years have passed since Earth died, Zexthera said. Coalition ships still avoid the Sol system. We still monitor deep space for signs of human activity, because we know that somewhere in the void, human voices are still whispering the same message Admiral Carter broadcast as her world burned. His compound eyes caught the cantina lights one last time. The human race endures. They remember everything. And they're still out there, waiting for the day they're strong enough to come home. The old warrior disappeared into the corridor, leaving the three young officers to contemplate a terrifying truth. Humanity had lost every battle and somehow still won the war by proving that victory against them would always cost more than defeat. In the silence that followed, each of them understood why veterans like Zexthera drank alone and why the galaxy would never forget the species that chose to die free rather than live in chains.